The drive from Olympia took me west through Montesano and then up along the Humptilips River, which was one of those names I'd been pronouncing wrong in my head for years, until I heard someone say it out loud at the district office. Hump, two lips. Not how I'd been saying it. I had the Forest Service truck, a white Ford F-250 with the green stripe and the Department of Agriculture shield on the door. It still smelled new inside. Fake leather and whatever they spray on the plastic. My duffel bag and a cardboard box of kitchen stuff I'd grabbed from my apartment sat in the back seat. I'd packed light. 6 months wasn't that long. That's what I kept telling myself. 6 months at the Quinault Ranger Station, then back to the regional office with field experience on my resume and a better shot at something that wasn't data entry and permit processing. I'd been doing desk work for 2 years. Spreadsheets and compliance reports and answering emails from people who wanted to know why they couldn't have a wedding ceremony in a designated wilderness area. It was fine. It was stable. But I didn't go into forestry to spend 40 hours a week under fluorescent lights. When Miles Duncan called and said they had a temporary opening at Quinault, I said yes before he finished the sentence. Probably should have asked more questions. That's me. The road curved through second-growth forest, Douglas fir and western hemlock pressing in on both sides. It was early March, so everything was wet. The trees were dark with it. Moss hung off the branches in clumps that looked heavier than the limbs themselves. I'd grown up in Tacoma, spent summers hiking around Rainier, so I knew wet forests. But this felt different. Thicker, maybe. Older in a way that didn't match the tree ages. Aubrey had called it a paid vacation when I told her. She was still in Olympia, managing a coffee roastery and not particularly interested in spending 6 months in a ranger station with no decent internet. We'd talked about it. She'd visit on weekends when she could. It made sense. I figured it'd be fine. The highway followed the Quinault River Valley, and then I passed the south end of Lake Quinault. The water was gray and flat, reflecting nothing. A few cabins sat back in the trees on the far side. The old Quinault Lodge was visible for a second through a gap in the forest, big and brown and probably full of tourists even in March. That's when my phone lost service. I glanced down at it in the cup holder. 4 bars, then 2, then nothing. Just blank. I picked it up at a stop sign and checked. No signal. Not even 1 bar trying. I put it back down. It wasn't a surprise. I knew the area didn't have great coverage, but seeing those empty bars made something tighten in my chest. I didn't like it. It felt permanent in a way I wasn't expecting. The kind of permanent that meant if I wanted to call Aubrey, I'd have to drive back an hour. If I wanted to check my email or look something up or just scroll through something mindless before bed, I couldn't. I kept driving. The ranger station was another 20 minutes past the lake, tucked into a clearing where the South Fork split off from the main river. It wasn't much. A main building that looked like it had been built in the 70s, brown siding and narrow windows. A smaller equipment shed. A garage bay. A couple of housing units out back that were basically trailers with porches. I parked next to a green Chevy Tahoe with Ranger Station stenciled on the side, grabbed my duffel, left the kitchen box for later. Duncan met me at the door. He was 50-something, stocky, with gray hair, buzzed short, and a face that looked like it'd spent a lot of years outside. Steel blue eyes that didn't blink much. He shook my hand, said my name once, and told me my unit was the second one on the left. "Settle in today," he said. "We'll go over your duties tomorrow morning." That was it. I hauled my stuff to the unit. It was small. A main room with a couch and a kitchenette, a bedroom barely big enough for the bed, a bathroom with a plastic shower. It smelled like pine cleaner and something musty underneath. There was a coffee maker on the counter, which helped. I unpacked. Didn't take long. I'd brought clothes, my laptop, a couple of books I probably wouldn't read, and a French press Aubrey had insisted I take because she didn't trust the coffee maker. She was right not to. By the time I got back outside to grab the kitchen box, it was almost dark. The forest around the clearing was already black. No light pollution out here. I stood there for a second, listening. The river was close enough that I could hear it, a low static hum that didn't stop. I went back inside and locked the door. Figured I'd call Aubrey, then remembered I couldn't. That first night was quiet. Too quiet, honestly. I ended up watching a downloaded movie on my laptop just to have noise. Duncan found me the next morning while I was drinking coffee on the porch. He didn't say good morning, just nodded and told me to come to the office when I was ready. I finished the cup, pulled on my jacket, followed him across the clearing. The office was in the main building, past a small reception area that didn't look like it saw much traffic. His desk was covered in maps and printed reports and a clipboard with daily logs clipped to it. Everything was organized. Neat. The kind of neat that meant he'd been doing this a long time. He gestured to a chair. I sat. "You worked at the regional office for 2 years," he said. Not a question. "Yeah. Permits and compliance." "Mostly." He nodded, pulled a map from the stack and spread it across the desk. It was a trail map, standard Forest Service issue. The Quinault district. I recognized Lake Quinault at the center, the river systems branching out. There was a section circled in red marker. South Fork Loop Trail. "This is your area," Duncan said. I looked at it. The loop started near the station, followed the South Fork upstream for about 3 miles, crossed at a footbridge, then looped back on the north side. Standard day hike, maybe 6 miles total. "Okay," I said. "It's not normal business," Duncan said. His tone didn't change, still flat, still measured, but there was something under it. I waited. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a plastic sleeve with a laminated card inside. The card was small, maybe 4 by 6 inches. It looked like it had been photocopied too many times. The text was dark and slightly blurred. He slid it across the desk. "Rule card for the South Fork Loop," he said. "We keep copies at the trailhead. You'll check them weekly, make sure they're readable and in stock." I picked it up. The plastic was scuffed. South Fork Loop Trail. Visitor guidelines was printed at the top in bold. Below that, a numbered list. I skimmed it. Some of it was normal. Stay on the marked trail. Pack out all trash. No camping within 200 feet of water. Some of it wasn't. If you encounter cairns or stacked stones that are not at a marked junction, do not follow them. Continue on the blazed trail. If you hear voices calling your name and cannot see the speaker, do not respond. Continue hiking at a normal pace. Do not approach or follow anyone you meet on the trail who is walking barefoot. I read that line again. Barefoot. "This is serious?" I said. Duncan looked at me, didn't blink. "Yes." I set the card down. "Is this some kind of local tradition thing? Keep the tourists from wandering off?" "It's policy," he said. "For this trail specifically. You don't need to explain it. You don't need to justify it. If someone asks, you tell them it's for their safety and refer them to me." "Okay." "You also don't mention it casually," Duncan said. "Not to visitors, not to anyone outside the district. It stays here." I nodded. My brain was filing it under station superstition, the kind of thing rangers pass down because it's easier than explaining why someone got lost 10 years ago. Every forest had stories. Mostly they were just stories. But Duncan's face didn't look like he was telling a story. "Understood," I said. He pulled the map back, folded it, and set it aside. "You'll patrol the South Fork Loop twice a week, Mondays and Thursdays. Check the trailhead kiosk, the bridges, the markers. If you see anything unusual, you log it and report to me. Don't try to handle it yourself." "What counts as unusual?" "You'll know," he said. That was it. He stood up, which meant I was supposed to leave. I picked up the rule card, looked at it one more time. The plastic was warm from sitting in the drawer. Do not approach or follow anyone you meet on the trail who is walking barefoot. Weird, but not impossible. People did weird things in the woods all the time. I told myself that. I walked out of the office with the card still in my hand, and I could feel Duncan watching me the whole way to the door. I spent the morning in the trailer going through my notes from the meeting. Wrote down the rules from the card in a notebook I'd brought. Don't follow cairns. Don't respond to voices calling your name. Don't approach barefoot hikers. Reading them back to myself didn't make them any less weird. I figured I'd ask Duncan for context later. Maybe there'd been incidents. People getting lost following false markers or something. That'd make sense for the cairn rule at least. The rest of it I didn't know. Around 1:30 I was heating up a can of soup on the kitchenette stove when I heard boots on gravel outside. Heavy steps, deliberate. Then a knock on the trailer door. I turned off the burner and opened it. Duncan stood there with his arms crossed. Got a call from Gray's Harbor Sheriff. Missing hiker. I waited. Deputy named Tammy Ward. She's coordinating. Hiker's name is Casey Pierce, 27, male. Went out yesterday morning and didn't come back. Last known location was somewhere near the South Fork. South Fork here? I said. Yeah. I leaned against the doorframe. You want me to check the loop? Ross is up at Graves Creek on a bridge repair. Won't be back till tomorrow. I've got a meeting with Forest Service admin in 2 hours and can't miss it. Duncan's jaw tightened. You're the only one available. Okay, I said. I can do that. Duncan didn't move. He looked past me into the trailer, then back at my face. This isn't a routine sweep. I know. Missing person. That too. He shifted his weight. But I'm talking about the loop specifically. It doesn't behave like other trails. I didn't say anything. The rules on that card aren't suggestions, Duncan said. They're procedures. You follow them the same way you'd follow protocol during a wildfire or a medical emergency. You don't improvise. I felt a little spike of irritation. I'd worked for the Forest Service for 2 years. Desk work, sure, but I knew how to follow guidelines. I can handle a short search, I said. Duncan's eyes stayed on me. I'm not questioning your competence. I'm telling you the loop is different. Different how? Just different. He pulled a folded printout from his jacket pocket and handed it over. Ward's contact info and the hiker's details. Vehicles still parked at Graves Creek Trailhead. Blue Honda Civic. If you find him, radio first. Then stabilize if he's injured. If you don't find him by 1800 hours, come back and we'll coordinate with search and rescue. I took the paper. Got it. Duncan stepped back but didn't turn to leave. The rules apply even during a search. Maybe especially during a search. Okay. I mean it, Marshal. I understand, I said. Probably sounded a little clipped. He held my gaze for another few seconds, then nodded once and walked back toward the main building. I closed the door and unfolded the printout. Deputy Tammy Ward's name was at the top with a direct office line. Below that was Casey Pierce's description. 5'10", slim build, sandy brown hair, gray eyes, last seen wearing a blue jacket and black hiking pants. Vehicle make and model matched what Duncan said. Estimated departure time yesterday was around 0900. No return by nightfall. Reported missing this morning by a friend who was supposed to meet him for dinner. I folded the paper and stuck it in my jacket pocket, then turned the stove back on to finish heating the soup. Ate it standing at the counter. My mind kept circling back to what Duncan said. The loop doesn't behave like other trails. What did that even mean? Trails were trails. Geographic features. They didn't behave, but he'd been serious. More serious than during the morning briefing. I rinsed the pot and grabbed my day pack from the bedroom. Checked the contents. Water bottle, half full. Flashlight, pocket knife, compass. Not enough for a real search operation. I went to the main building and found Duncan at his desk with reading glasses on, typing something on an old desktop computer. Need a first aid kit, I said from the doorway. He didn't look up. Supply closet, second door on the left down the hall. I found it. Metal shelving units with boxes labeled in faded marker. First aid kits on the third shelf, the orange fabric kind with a white cross. I took one and checked inside. Bandages, antiseptic, gauze, medical tape, emergency blanket. Basic stuff. Good enough for stabilization. I also grabbed 2 extra water bottles from a case on the floor. Duncan was still typing when I passed his office on the way out. I loaded the gear into the F-250 and started the engine. The drive to Graves Creek trailhead was about 15 minutes north, back toward the lake, and then east up a Forest Service road. I'd looked at the map enough that morning to remember the route. The road was narrow and rough, potholes every 30 feet or so. I took it slow. Fir trees crowded both sides, thick enough that the canopy blocked most of the sky. It was overcast anyway. Gray light filtering through. I passed a turnoff for a campground. Empty this time of year. Another half mile and the road dead-ended at a gravel parking area surrounded by more trees. One vehicle sat near the trailhead kiosk, blue Honda Civic, Washington plates. I parked next to it and got out, checked the Civic through the windows. Nothing unusual. Empty coffee cup in the holder, jacket balled up in the back seat, registration sticker current. The trailhead kiosk was a standard wooden structure with a plexiglass-covered map and a registry box mounted on a post. I walked over and opened the registry. Flipped back through the pages. Most entries were from last summer, a few from fall, then nothing until yesterday. Casey Pierce, Party of 1, 09:15 departure, South Fork Loop Trail. His handwriting was neat, confident loops on the capital letters. I closed the registry and looked at the trailhead. The official Forest Service sign was brown with routed yellow letters. South Fork Loop Trail, 6.2 miles, moderate difficulty, stay on marked path. And nailed directly underneath it, maybe an inch of space between them, was another sign. This one was newer. Clean pale wood looked fresh cut. The letters were burned in, dark and precise. Same text. South Fork Loop Trail. I stopped. Stood there staring at it. It wasn't weathered, wasn't faded. The wood still had that raw smell, sharp and resinous. Someone had made it recently and mounted it right under the official marker. I thought about vandalism. Bored kids, maybe. Or someone's idea of trail improvement. Redundant, but not impossible. I looked past the kiosk to the trailhead itself. Narrow dirt path heading into the trees. Standard stuff. I adjusted the pack on my shoulders and started walking. 10 yards in, I saw the second sign. Same exact design. Clean pale wood. Burned letters. South Fork Loop Trail. This one was nailed to a fir tree on the right side of the path, about chest height. Positioned so you couldn't miss it if you were walking in. I stopped again. 2 identical signs within 10 yards. Both new. Both precise. Something turned over in my stomach. Not quite worry, just a feeling that things weren't lining up right. I remembered the rule card, pulled it from my pocket and scanned the list. There it was. Third rule down. If you encounter 2 identical trail signs within sight of each other, turn around immediately and return to the last road crossing. Do not proceed farther on the trail. Report the incident to the ranger station. I read it twice, looked back at the trailhead. I could still see the kiosk from here, and the 2 signs were definitely within sight of each other. I folded the card and put it back in my jacket, stood there for a minute. Maybe longer. The thing was, it didn't make sense. Casey Pierce had gone missing. He was out here somewhere, possibly injured, possibly in trouble. Turning around because of 2 wooden signs felt absurd. Felt like the kind of superstitious nonsense that had no place in an actual emergency. And Duncan's whole speech about the loop being different, sure, fine. Maybe there were weird patterns or local quirks, but at the end of the day it was just a trail. Trees and dirt and a river. I'd been hiking since I was a kid. I knew how to navigate. I knew how to stay found. The rules were probably there for tourists, people who didn't know the terrain, people who might panic and make bad decisions. I wasn't a tourist. I looked at the second sign again. The letters were so clean. Whoever made it had taken their time. Probably some prank. Someone messing with hikers, or maybe even messing with the Forest Service specifically. Wouldn't be the first time. I adjusted my pack straps and kept walking. I kept going. The rule said turn around. Duncan's voice was still in my head saying the same thing. But Casey Pierce had been out here since yesterday morning, and if he'd twisted an ankle or worse, another hour could matter. I figured I'd walk another half-mile, maybe a little more, then loop back if I didn't find anything. The trail past the second sign looked completely normal, packed dirt with gravel showing through in the dry spots. Fir trees on both sides, thick enough that the canopy blocked most of the gray sky. Moss covered everything that wasn't moving. Logs, rocks, the north side of every trunk. The air smelled wet and green, the way it always does out here in winter. I could hear the South Fork somewhere off to my left, a low, steady rush that never really stopped. I passed a rotted stump with bracket fungi growing out of it in layers. Past a Douglas fir with a blaze mark cut into the bark at eye level, white wood showing through. Normal trail maintenance, normal forest. My boots crunched on gravel and my pack settled into the familiar weight across my shoulders. I'd done this kind of walk 100 times during my field training. More than that, probably. This was just hiking. Except I kept thinking about those two signs. Clean wood. Dark burned letters. Both identical. I shook it off and kept my eyes on the trail. About 20 yards farther, the ground turned soft. Mud pooled in the low spots where runoff had collected, and the trail cut through it in a narrow channel. I slowed down and looked at the prints. Boot treads. A few different patterns, all jumbled together. Some looked older, the edges already smoothing out. Others were sharper, maybe from yesterday or this morning. I crouched down and tried to pick out a consistent tread, something I could follow, but there were too many overlapping. Someone in a hiking boot with aggressive lugs, someone else in something flatter, maybe trail runners. A third set that could have been work boots. One print near the edge looked fresh. Deep heel strike, narrow sole. Could have been Casey's size. Could have been anyone's. I stood up and pulled the radio off my belt, pressed the button and waited for the squelch to clear. Station, this is Marshall. Over. The response came back in under 3 seconds. Go ahead. Duncan's voice, flat and immediate, like he'd been holding the radio already. I'm on South Fork Loop, about a mile in. Found some boot prints in the mud, but nothing definitive. No sign of the hiker yet. Over. Silence for a moment. Then, did you see anything doubled? I frowned. What? Signs, markers, blazes, anything repeated where it shouldn't be. I looked back down the trail toward the trailhead, even though I couldn't see it anymore through the trees. My chest tightened a little. Yeah, I said. 2 signs at the trailhead. Identical. Another pause. Longer this time. Rule 3, Duncan said. Turn around and return to the last road crossing. Do not proceed farther. Over. I stood there with the radio in my hand, staring at the mud and the prints that might have belonged to Casey Pierce. Guy had been out here since yesterday. If he was hurt, if he was stuck somewhere waiting for help, me walking back to the truck wasn't going to do him any good. Copy, I said. Heading back now. Over. I clipped the radio back onto my belt. Then I kept walking. Look, I'm not saying it was smart. I'm saying it made sense at the time. 2 wooden signs didn't mean Casey wasn't out here somewhere with a broken leg or hypothermia. Duncan's rules were procedures, sure, but procedures get written by people sitting in offices who aren't the ones actually on the ground. I'd worked in that regional office for 2 years. I knew how these things got made. Someone had a weird experience once, wrote it down, and now it's policy forever even if the situation doesn't match. I figured I'd go another 10 minutes, 15 at most. just far enough to check the next junction or clearing, somewhere a hiker might stop to rest. Then I'd turn around and tell Duncan I'd followed his rule. The trail curved to the left and started to climb. Not steep, just a gentle rise that pulled away from the river a little. The sound of the water got quieter. I could still hear it, but it felt farther off now, muffled by the trees. My boots found their rhythm again. Step, step, step. Gravel crunching, branches overhead dripping leftover rain. I checked my watch, 14:32. 10 minutes later, I hit the boardwalk. It wasn't long, maybe 15 feet, built low over a marshy patch where the trail cut through standing water. The boards were old but solid-looking, weathered gray with gaps between them where you could see black mud and reeds underneath. Standard Forest Service construction. I'd seen 100 of them. I stepped off the gravel and put my left boot on the first board. Something slammed up from underneath. Hard. Hard enough that the whole boardwalk lifted, board separating from the frame supports with a crack like a gunshot. My right foot was still on gravel, and my left went up 6 inches, maybe more, and I threw my weight backward to keep from pitching forward into the marsh. The boardwalk dropped, then it hit again. Same spot, right under where my boot had been. The boards bucked, and I heard scraping, long and deliberate, like nails dragging across wood from below. Slow, methodical, moving from the center toward the edge where I was standing. I jerked back onto the gravel and froze. My heart was going. I could feel it in my throat. I stared at the boardwalk, at the gaps between the boards, at the black water underneath. Nothing surfaced. The scraping stopped. The boards settled back into place, flat and level, like nothing had touched them. The marsh was still. No ripples, no movement, just reeds and mud and that sick, sweet smell of rotting vegetation. I stood there for at least a minute, maybe longer. The boardwalk looked completely normal. I was not stepping into that marsh. I don't care what was down there or wasn't down there. I wasn't putting a boot in that water. But the trail kept going on the other side, and Casey Pierce had come this way yesterday. I took a breath, adjusted my pack, and stepped onto the first board again. Fast this time. No weight on it, just using it to push off toward the second board, then the third, moving quick and light across the whole span until I was back on gravel on the far side. Nothing happened. I looked back. The boardwalk sat there, still and gray and ordinary. I told myself it was a structural issue, loose supports, something shifting underneath when weight hit it wrong. A hazard, sure, but a manageable one, the kind of thing I'd log in a report and Duncan would send someone out to fix. That was all. I kept walking. I heard my name maybe 50 yards past the boardwalk. Nicholas. Just that. Normal volume, normal tone, the kind of voice you use when someone's 10 feet away and you want their attention. I stopped walking, turned my head to the right without thinking about it. The voice came from somewhere in the trees, not deep in the forest. Close. Maybe 15 or 20 feet off the trail where the ferns grew thick and the Douglas firs crowded together. I scanned the tree line, didn't see anyone. Nicholas. There it was again, same spot, same tone, calm, not urgent, just calling. I caught movement between the ferns, something dark shifting behind the green. My boot lifted to step off the trail. Then I stopped, mid-step, weight still on my back foot. The rule card was in my jacket pocket, but I didn't need to pull it out. I knew what it said. If you hear voices calling your name without seeing the speaker, do not respond and continue hiking at normal pace. I put my boot back down on the trail, faced forward, kept my eyes on the path ahead. My heart was going pretty good. Not panic, just the spike you get when something's off and your body figures it out before your brain does. I started walking, normal pace. That's what the card said. Normal pace. Didn't look back at the ferns. Didn't call out to ask who was there. Just walked. Nicholas. Closer this time. Maybe 10 feet off the trail now. Same tone, same calm delivery, but closer. The voice sounded familiar, not like anyone specific, just familiar the way a stranger's voice can sound normal and human and safe. That was the worst part. It didn't sound wrong. It sounded fine. I kept walking, eyes down, watching the trail, boots on gravel, one foot then the other. The trees pressed in on both sides. The trail narrowed here. Ferns brushed my pants as I passed. I thought about Casey Pierce, 27, blue jacket, black hiking pants. He came through here yesterday morning. I wondered if he heard his name too. I wondered if he stopped. Nicholas. Right beside the trail now, maybe 5 feet into the ferns. Close enough that if it were actually a person, I'd see them clearly. I didn't look. My hands were shaking a little. I shoved them in my jacket pockets and kept moving. The voice came again. Different this time. Marshall. That stopped me cold, not physically. I kept walking, but something in my chest clenched up. Because that was Duncan's cadence. The way he said my last name yesterday when he met me at the truck. Flat. No inflection. Just the name. Marshall. Stop. I didn't stop. The trail curved left. I followed it. My breathing was too loud. I tried to keep it steady. Marshall, I'm telling you to stop. Duncan's voice. Exact same low volume, same clipped authority. The kind of tone that makes you want to turn around and acknowledge, because ignoring a supervisor feels wrong on some basic level. I focused on the trail, a root crossing the path, a white blaze on a hemlock trunk, moss on the rocks. The voice shifted again. Nick. My stomach dropped, because that was Aubrey, not her voice exactly. Her cadence, the way she says my name when I'm in another room and she wants me to come look at something. Nick, come here. I stopped walking, not because I wanted to, because my legs just quit. I stood there in the middle of the trail with my pack on my back and the rain starting to soak through my jacket collar, and I stared at the dirt. Aubrey was in Olympia, 2.5 hours away, managing the roastery. She wasn't here. Nick? Closer, right at the edge of the trail now. I forced my eyes to stay down, forced my boots to start moving again. One step, then another. The voice kept calling, sometimes Duncan's flat delivery, sometimes Aubrey's familiar lilt, back and forth, switching every few seconds like it was testing which one worked better. That's when the rules stopped feeling like folklore. They stopped feeling like some weird tradition or outdated protocol someone wrote after a hiker got spooked once. They started feeling like actual survival instructions, because whatever was out there in the trees knew those voices, knew how to shape them, knew which ones would make me turn around. I kept walking. My hands were clenched in my pockets. My jaw was tight. The voices kept calling for maybe another 2 minutes. Then they stopped. The forest went quiet again. Just the river and the rain and my boots on gravel. I didn't relax. I kept my eyes forward, and my pace steady, and I didn't look into the trees. The rain had been steady for hours. I didn't know exactly when it started. Sometime after the boardwalk, maybe. Or before. It all blurred together. But it was steady, consistent. The kind of Pacific Northwest rain that's not heavy enough to soak you fast, but never stops long enough for anything to dry. It pattered on the canopy overhead, dripped from the ferns, turned the trail into a slick mess of mud and wet gravel. I'd been walking for probably another 30 minutes when it cut off, not tapered, not slowed, just stopped. One second it was raining, the next second it wasn't. I looked up. The canopy was still there. The clouds were still gray. Everything looked the same, but no rain. I kept walking, slower now, listening. The river was gone too. I stopped. The South Fork had been a constant background hum since I started this trail. sometimes louder when the trail ran close to the bank, sometimes quieter when it curved away, but always there. Now it was silent. I turned my head toward where the river should be, maybe 40 feet downslope through the trees. Nothing. Even my footsteps sounded wrong, muffled, like someone put a blanket over the whole forest. I pulled the rule card out of my pocket. My hands were shaking again. I had to hold it steady to read. Most of the rules I'd memorized by now, but there was one I hadn't paid much attention to. Rule 7. If all sound stops, rain, wind, water, birds, do not move forward. Press your back against the nearest large tree and count slowly to 60. Do not move until natural sound returns. I looked around. The nearest large tree was a cedar about 10 feet to my left. Massive trunk. Had to be 6 feet across. Bark thick and ridged. I walked over to it. My boots made almost no sound on the wet ground. I pressed my back against the trunk and started counting. 1, 2, 3. The bark felt strange under my palms. Warm, not hot, just warm. Like it had been sitting in sunlight. Which made no sense because it was overcast and raining 10 seconds ago. 4, 5, 6. I kept counting. My voice was only in my head. I didn't say the numbers out loud. 7, 8, 9. Smoke. I smelled it. Campfire smoke, wood burning, the sharp, clean scent of cedar or fir. 10, 11, 12. I kept my back pressed to the tree. My eyes scanned the forest. Didn't see any fire. Didn't see any smoke rising. Just the smell. Drifting through the air. 13, 14, 15. The forest was completely soaked. Everything was wet. Moss, ferns, logs, the ground. Nothing should be burning. 16, 17, 18. The warmth from the cedar bark was seeping through my jacket, through my shirt, into my back. It felt wrong, but the rule said stay put until 60. 19, 20, 21. The smoke smell got stronger. I kept breathing it in, kept counting. 22, 23, 24. My hands were flat against the bark. I could feel the ridges, the texture, the warmth. 25, 26, 27. I thought about Casey Pierce again. Wondered if he pressed his back against a tree and counted to 60. Wondered if he made it to 60. 28, 29, 30, halfway, 31, 32, 33. The silence pressed in. No rain, no river, no wind, no birds, nothing. Just my breathing and the numbers in my head. 34, 35, 36. The bark was almost hot now, not painful, just uncomfortable. I didn't move. 37, 38, 39, 40, 41, 42. The smoke smell was everywhere. In my jacket, in my hair. I was going to reek of it. 43, 44, 45. I kept my eyes open, kept scanning the trees. Still didn't see anything. 46, 47, 48. My shoulders were tense. My neck hurt. I forced myself to stay still. 49, 50, 51, almost there. 52, 53, 54. The warmth was spreading down my spine, across my shoulder blades. 55, 56, 57, 3 more, 58, 59, 60. The rain came back, not gradually, all at once, like someone pressed play. The patter on the canopy, the drip from the ferns, the hum of the river downslope, birds calling somewhere off to the right. Everything, all at once. I pushed off the cedar and stepped back onto the trail. My back was sweating. The bark had left my jacket warm to the touch. The smoke smell was gone. I looked at the cedar. It looked normal. Just a tree. Wet bark. Moss growing on the north side. I put the rule card back in my pocket and started walking again. My legs felt shaky. My hands were still trembling a little. but I kept moving, kept my eyes on the trail, because Casey Pierce was still out here somewhere, and I was running out of daylight. The trail curved right and opened up a little. I checked Duncan's map, which I'd folded and shoved in my jacket pocket before leaving the station. According to the creases and faded ink, there should have been a junction here. Main loop continuing straight, spur trail branching left toward an established campsite maybe a quarter mile in. I stopped walking. There was a sign. Fresh pale wood, dark burned letters, chest height, nailed to a hemlock on the left side of the trail. It read, South Fork Loop Trailhead, 2.8 miles with an arrow pointing back the direction I'd come from. Not the campsite spur. Not a distance marker counting down the loop. A trailhead sign, giving the exact name and mileage as if I was standing at a legitimate access point and the parking lot was 2.8 miles behind me. I looked past the sign down the left fork. Dirt trail, normal width, no marker posts or blazes I could see from here. Could have been the campsite spur. Could have been anything. I pulled the map out again and unfolded it all the way, holding it flat even though the paper was damp and wanted to curl. The spur was marked clearly, dotted line, tiny tent symbol, label reading, Fern Creek Camp 0.3 Me. No mention of a trailhead, no reason for a trailhead to exist here in the middle of the loop 3 miles from the nearest road. The sign looked new. Same clean wood as the two I'd passed at the actual trailhead. Same sharp smell, same precise lettering, like someone installed it yesterday. Or this morning. I stepped closer and ran my hand along the edge. Smooth, no weathering, no moss, no dirt packed into the grain. The nails were clean too, galvanized steel, no rust. I turned around and looked back down the trail I just walked. Trees, ferns, gravel, wet bark. The path I'd been following for the last hour or so. No trailhead behind me, just more forest. That's when it clicked. The rule card said if you see 2 identical signs, turn around immediately and return to the last road crossing. I'd seen 2 identical signs at the actual trailhead, kiosk and the one 10 yards in. I'd kept walking anyway, and now I was standing somewhere the map said shouldn't have a trailhead, looking at a sign that claimed the trailhead was nearly 3 miles behind me in the direction I'd come from. I tried to retrace it in my head. Gravel lot at Graves Creek. Kiosk. 2 identical signs, muddy boot prints, boardwalk over the marsh, voices in the trees calling my name, the silence and the cedar tree, rain stopping and starting. All of that was behind me now, and the last road crossing, the only road crossing, was the Forest Service spur where I'd parked the truck. That was miles ago. I couldn't follow the rule anymore. It was physically impossible. The instruction demanded I turn around and return to the last road crossing, but I'd already passed it, kept going, and now the trail was telling me the trailhead was behind me in a place I knew for certain it wasn't. The rule assumed the trail stayed consistent. It assumed geography worked. I folded the map and shoved it back in my pocket. My radio was clipped to my belt. I pulled it free, thumbed the switch, and brought it up. Marshall to Duncan. You copy? Static. Thin and crackling, no shape to it. I tried again. Marshall to Canole Station requesting confirmation on... More static. I adjusted the squelch dial, checked the channel, still set to 5, same as this morning, and keyed the mic again. Duncan, I'm at a junction with a duplicate trailhead sign. Map doesn't show this. Requesting guidance. Over. Nothing. Just white noise hissing through the speaker. I stood there holding the radio, staring at the sign, trying to decide if I should mark it somehow or take a photo or just keep moving. My phone was back in the truck. No signal out here anyway. The radio was the only link I had, and it wasn't working. Then the static cut off. A voice came through. Calm, measured, low volume. Duncan's voice. Marshall, this is Duncan. I copy. Continue forward. Pierce is ahead of you. I opened my mouth to respond. My thumb was already on the mic button. Then I stopped. The voice was right. Cadence, tone, clipped delivery. It sounded exactly like Duncan sounded yesterday when he'd told me to come to the office. Exactly like he'd sounded on the radio earlier when he'd asked if I'd seen anything doubled. But Duncan had told me to turn around. He'd invoked Rule 3. He'd said return to the last road crossing and do not proceed farther. This voice was telling me to continue forward. I looked down at the radio in my hand. The green transmit light was off. No one was keying a mic on the other end. The voice had just come through on open air. Marshall. The voice again, still calm. Acknowledge. Pierce is injured. Continue on the main trail. I'm coordinating search and rescue from the station. Confirm you copy. It used the right call sign. It knew my name. It knew Casey's name. It knew the search and rescue terminology. I thought about the voices in the trees. The ones that had called Nicholas and then Marshall and then Nick in Aubrey's exact tone. I didn't key the mic. I clipped the radio back to my belt, turned around and started walking back the way I'd come. The voice came through one more time, quieter now, almost conversational. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. I kept walking, didn't respond, didn't look back at the sign. The trail felt different on the return. I noticed it after maybe 10 minutes. The gravel under my boots, it was smoother. Not muddy anymore, not uneven, just packed and level. The kind of surface you'd expect on a park path in town. Not a backcountry loop that saw maybe a dozen hikers a week. I stopped and crouched down, running my hand over it. The stones were small and uniform, pressed tight together. No gaps, no loose rocks. It didn't feel like the same trail I'd walked an hour ago. I kept going. When I reached the boardwalk over the marsh, I slowed down. I remembered the way it had bucked under my boot, the scraping from below, the feeling of something slamming upward hard enough to crack the boards loose from the frame. I stepped onto the first board. It didn't creak. I put my full weight on it. Solid. No give, no sway. I walked across slowly, testing each board. They were dry now, even though it had rained on and off all afternoon. The gaps between them were clean. No mud, no reeds poking through. The marsh below looked shallow and still. Nothing touched the boards. Nothing moved. I reached the other side and turned around, staring back at the span. It looked new. The wood was pale gray, barely weathered. The frame supports were level and tight. That felt worse than the scraping, because it meant the trail could change. It could buck and crack and threaten, and then it could smooth itself out and pretend nothing had happened. It could be dangerous or safe depending on what it wanted, and I had no way of knowing which version I was walking through at any given moment. I kept moving, eyes forward, boots finding rhythm. The light started dropping fast. I didn't notice at first. The canopy was thick here, and it had been overcast all day, so it was already dim. But then I checked my watch. Old Timex Aubrey gave me 3 years ago, basic dial, nothing fancy, and it read 4:42. I looked up. The sky through the gaps in the branches was still bright. Overcast gray, yeah, but daylight gray. The kind of light you'd see mid-afternoon in April, not late enough for dusk. I stopped walking and held my wrist up, double-checking the time. 4:42. The second hand was moving, ticking forward in steady increments. The watch was working, but the light didn't match. At 4:42 in mid-April, the sun wouldn't set for at least another 2 hours, maybe closer to 3. I should have had plenty of daylight left. But when I looked down at the trail, the shadows were long and deep, pooling between the trees in a way that only happened right before dark. I turned in a slow circle, trying to figure out which one was lying. The sky said afternoon. The watch said late. The shadows said dusk. I couldn't tell which reality to trust. I saw the light first. warm yellow glow about 50 yards ahead, bobbing slightly at chest height, moving at a normal walking pace. Someone carrying a lantern. My chest loosened for the first time in probably an hour. A real person. Someone hiking out late. Maybe Casey. I picked up my pace a little, not running, just closing the distance. The lantern swung gently with each step, and I could make out the shape behind it now. Average height, dark jacket, jeans maybe, boots, modern gear, normal hiking clothes. The person wasn't calling out or waving, just walking steady toward the trailhead. I opened my mouth to call out, then stopped. The rule card. I pulled it from my jacket pocket with stiff fingers and found the line I'd read 3 times already, but hadn't thought about since the voices stopped. Rule 11. If you encounter someone carrying a lantern after dark, do not approach them. Do not speak to them. Do not allow them to fall in behind you on the trail. I looked up. The lantern was still there, maybe 40 yards now. The person kept walking at the same pace, not looking back. The light pooled on the trail in front of them, warm and steady and completely normal. I checked my watch. 4:58. The second hand had stopped moving sometime between the last time I checked and now, frozen at the 6. But the shadows still said dusk, and the sky still said afternoon, and my gut said I didn't know what time it actually was. After dark. The rule said after dark. My watch said 4:58, but the second hand was dead and the shadows were long and the light through the canopy didn't match anything that made sense. I had no idea if it counted as after dark or not. The lantern was 30 yards ahead now. I slowed my pace. Not stopping, just matching the distance. The person didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge me, just kept walking with that steady rhythm. I couldn't see their face. The lantern light threw everything behind it into silhouette. I thought about Casey Pierce. Blue jacket, black pants, sandy brown hair. The figure ahead wore dark colors. Could be blue. Could be black. Could be Casey, injured or disoriented, carrying a lantern he found somewhere trying to get out. Or it could be something else. I kept walking, kept the distance steady. 30 yards, maybe 25. Close enough to see, but not close enough to call out. The rule said, don't approach, don't speak. It didn't say turn around. It didn't say stop walking. I just had to make sure they didn't fall in behind me. The trail narrowed. Ferns pressed in from both sides, brushing my pants and jacket sleeves. The gravel under my boots was uneven now, broken up by roots pushing through in thick, ropey tangles. I had to watch my footing, step careful over each section. The lantern stayed ahead, same distance. 25 yards, maybe 30. I turned on my headlamp. The beam cut through the rain and hit the wet ferns, reflecting back in little bright points. I angled it down at the trail to see the roots better. Some of them looked wrong. Not wrong in a way I could explain. Just shapes that didn't quite read as roots. I crouched for a second, keeping my eyes on the lantern, and looked at a section near my left boot. 3 roots crossed the gravel in parallel lines, each one curved in a tight arc at the top. They looked like the letter C. Right next to it, 2 more roots formed a narrow A. I stood up, told myself roots grow however they grow, and sometimes they look like letters. That's just pattern recognition, the brain finding shapes in random noise. I kept walking. The rain hit my jacket and ran down my sleeves. At the edges of my headlamp beam, where the light thinned out and met the dark, the rain looked strange. Not falling. Rising. Little drops lifting up instead of coming down, drifting in reverse for just a second before disappearing into the black. I blinked hard, adjusted the headlamp strap. The rain kept rising at the edges. Behind me I heard footsteps. I stopped walking. The footsteps stopped. I turned my head slow, just enough to see over my shoulder. My headlamp beam swung across the trail behind me. Empty. Wet gravel, ferns, trees. No one there. I turned back around. The lantern was still ahead, same distance, still moving. I started walking again. The footsteps started behind me. Same rhythm, same pace. Boot on gravel, matching mine exactly. I sped up a little. The footsteps sped up. I slowed down. The footsteps slowed down. I stopped. The footsteps stopped. The lantern kept moving ahead, pulling farther now. 35 yards. 40. I looked back again. Nothing. Just my headlamp beam on wet trail and the rain rising at the edges and the dark pressing in from the sides. I faced forward and started walking fast. Not running. Just a hard, steady pace. The footsteps matched me exactly, staying maybe 10 feet back, close enough that I should be able to see whoever it was if I turned around, but I already knew I wouldn't see anyone. The lantern stayed ahead. Fixed distance now. No matter how fast I walked, it stayed 40 yards out. I kept my eyes on it and kept moving. The footsteps stayed locked behind me, boot for boot, breath for breath. The trail opened up a little and I saw the problem. Washout. 10 feet of trail just gone. Gravel on my side, then a stretch of mud about 3 feet wide, slick and black and pooling with rainwater. On the far side, a section of old boardwalk started up again. Gray, weathered planks running another 15 feet before the trail went back to gravel. Normally, I'd just step across. Mud's mud. 3 feet is nothing. But the rule card said, don't step off gravel or boardwalk after sunset. I pulled the card out again. Rule 9, clear as anything. After sunset, stay on gravel or boardwalk sections. Do not step onto bare earth or mud. If the trail is broken, see Rule 7. Rule 7, press your back against the nearest large tree and count to 60. My watch still read 4:58 with the second hand frozen at the 6. The shadows still said dusk. The sky still said afternoon. I had no idea what time it was, but the watch was the only thing I had that gave me a number, and that number said after sunset. I chose the watch. The nearest large tree was a cedar about 8 feet to my right. Thick trunk, ridged bark, probably 6 feet across. I walked to it, turned my back and pressed my shoulders against the bark. The lantern stopped moving. I started counting. 1, 2, 3. The lantern glow got brighter, not moving closer, just intensifying, like someone turned up the wick. 4, 5, 6. Behind me, the footsteps stopped. I didn't hear them walk up. They were just there, close, maybe 3 feet back. 7, 8, 9. The bark felt warm again, same as the last tree. Not hot yet, just warm, like sun-soaked wood. 10, 11, 12. The lantern light filled the trail now, bright enough that I could see the ferns casting shadows and the rain falling through the beam in silver streaks. 13, 14, 15. I heard breathing, not mine, behind me, close to my left ear, slow and steady, in and out, in and out. 16, 17, 18. The bark got hotter under my shoulder blades. The breathing stayed close. I didn't turn my head, didn't move. 19, 20, 21. The lantern glow turned orange, then amber, then almost red. My headlamp beam looked pale and weak in comparison. 22, 23, 24. The breathing moved closer. I felt it on my neck now, just below my ear, warm, damp. 25, 26, 27. My hands were shaking. I kept them pressed flat against the bark. 28, 29, 30, halfway. The breathing stayed right there, inches from my skin. The bark burned hot now, uncomfortable through my jacket and shirt. The lantern glow turned deep red, pulsing slightly. 31, 32, 33. I thought about Casey. Wondered if he made it to 60. Wondered if he turned around. 34, 35, 36. The breathing changed rhythm. Faster now, excited. 37, 38, 39. The bark was almost too hot to stand. I kept my back against it anyway. 40, 41, 42. The red glow filled everything. I could see it through my closed eyelids. 43, 44, 45. Something touched my hair. Light pressure like fingers running through it. 46, 47, 48. I didn't move. 49, 50, 51. The breathing was right against my ear now. I felt lips almost touching skin. 52, 53, 54. The bark burned. The red light pulsed. The breathing filled my head. 55, 56, 57. Almost there. 58, 59. The touch on my hair moved down to my shoulder. 60. Sound slammed back. Rain hitting ferns, river running, wind in the canopy. All of it at once, loud and normal and real. I opened my eyes. The trail ahead was dark except for my headlamp beam. No lantern, no red glow, just wet gravel and ferns and trees. I looked down at my watch. The face was black. Dead. No numbers, no hands, nothing. I pushed off the cedar and turned around. The footsteps were gone. The breathing was gone. The trail behind me was empty. I looked ahead. The washout was gone. The trail was intact. Gravel ran straight through where the mud had been. No break, no boardwalk. Just continuous trail. I didn't stop to think about it. I started walking fast, controlled pace, eyes forward. The trailhead had to be close, maybe a mile, maybe less. I kept moving. I hit the Graves Creek Road crossing at what my dead watch couldn't tell me, but my legs said was maybe 20 minutes later. The gravel parking area appeared through the trees, and I stepped off the trail onto the dirt access road and felt the air change. Pressure released. That's the only way I can describe it, like I'd been inside something and just stepped out. I stopped and turned around. The trail opening looked normal. Just trees and ferns and the wooden trailhead sign reading South Fork Loop Trail in routed yellow letters. I walked to my truck. The blue Honda was still parked next to it, windows dark, unchanged. I unlocked the F-250 and opened the driver's door, pulled myself up into the cab and reached back to toss my pack on the back seat. I stopped. Boot prints, damp, fresh. Pressed into the fabric of the back seat in a clear pattern. 2 prints, left and right, like someone stood there. Small, maybe size 8 or 9. Narrow sole. Different tread than mine. Small circular lugs instead of my aggressive rectangular pattern. I leaned over the seat and looked closer. The prints were already drying at the edges, but still damp in the centers. Recent, within the last hour, maybe less. I checked the rear doors, locked. I checked the front doors, locked. I'd locked the truck before starting the hike. I always lock it. The prints sat there anyway. I didn't touch them. I climbed into the driver's seat, started the engine, and drove back to the station without stopping once. Duncan was waiting on the main building porch when I pulled in, not standing at the door, not inside, just waiting outside in the dark, arms crossed, watching me park. I got out and walked over. He didn't say anything, just turned and went inside. I followed him to his office. He closed the door behind us. "Report," he said. I pulled the rule card from my jacket pocket and set it on his desk. I broke Rule 3, at the start, saw the 2 identical signs and kept going anyway. Duncan picked up the card and slid it back into its plastic sleeve. He didn't look surprised. "Did you make it back to the road crossing?" "Yeah." "Alone?" I thought about the boot prints. "Yeah." Duncan sat down and opened a drawer. He pulled out a notebook with a brown cover, old, the kind with sewn binding and thick pages. He flipped it open to a marked page and turned it around so I could read it. The handwriting was tight and neat, written in blue pen. The entry at the top read, Ross, South Fork Loop Patrol, October 14th, 1430, departed trailhead. Trail conditions normal. 1520. Encountered hiker with lantern at mile 2.3. Unusual for daytime. Attempted contact. No response. Subject continued toward trailhead. 1545. Lantern visible behind me. Same distance. Does not close gap. 1605. Followed protocol. Rule 7. Lantern extinguished during count. 1620. Lantern reappeared ahead. Moving away from trailhead now, deeper into loop. 1640. Made decision to follow. Pierce may be carrying lantern. Cannot abandon search. 1710. Still following. Trail does not match map. Boardwalk sections appearing where none charted. 1755. Lantern stopped. I stopped. Distance steady. The entry ended there. No timestamp after 1755. No note about returning to the road crossing. Nothing. I looked up at Duncan. He didn't come back? He made it back to the trailhead 3 days later. Walked out on his own. No gear, no radio, boots gone. Wouldn't say what happened. Turned in his resignation the next morning. Duncan closed the notebook and put it back in the drawer. Rule 3 exists because the trail gives you one chance to leave. You ignored it. You're lucky you counted to 60 when it mattered. I didn't argue. File your report, Duncan said. Stick to what you can document. Time on trail, distance covered, conditions observed. Leave out what you can't support. Casey Pierce. We'll coordinate with Grays Harbor Sheriff tomorrow. Expand the search area. Send a team up from the north access. Duncan stood up. You're off South Fork Loop. Permanently. I nodded. Duncan opened the door. Get some sleep. Clean your truck in the morning. I filed the report at 0630 the next day. Stuck to facts, trail conditions, visibility, time estimates, distances. No voices, no lantern. No counting against a cedar while something breathed on my neck. At 0700 I pulled the floor mats from the F-250 and hosed them down behind the equipment shed. I scrubbed the back seat with a rag and cleaner from the supply closet until the damp boot prints were gone. Checked every surface. Wiped down the door handles inside and out. The search for Casey Pierce continued. A team went in from the north access road and covered the upper sections of the loop. They found his day pack near Fern Creek Camp, contents intact. No sign of struggle. No sign of Casey. After a week, Grays Harbor Sheriff scaled back to a recovery operation. After 2 weeks, they suspended active search. I stayed at Kinnell Station. Duncan assigned me to the East District trails, normal routes, normal hikers, normal problems. I filed normal reports and followed normal procedures, and didn't go near South Fork Loop again. But I kept the rule card. Duncan gave me a copy for my records, laminated, same blurred text. I put it in my desk drawer under a stack of trail maps. And I kept the memory of those boot prints in my back seat. Small, narrow, wrong tread. I stayed alive. That's what matters. I followed the rules when it counted, and I made it back to the road crossing, and I drove away. The forest tested me. It almost kept me. It didn't, but it kept something.